Movement models. I'm going to start this with a little story of me and my forever failures of learning and trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing with this movement, fitness, body thing. And there were a lot of models I was exposed to through my own training, through CrossFit, throughout my times learning. And a model effectively is an accumulation of knowledge put together in it doesn't even have to be a logical fashion, but there's models everywhere. And models help us simplify our understanding, our learning, just like reality. Reality is very different to our consciousness, but our brain has to simplify things so we can understand them and not use all of our energy just to kind of get through life in a manageable way. Because if we didn't do something like that, then the world would be far too complex and we would be stuck doing nothing and we wouldn't be very productive and we probably wouldn't be the species that we are today. And that's why we use models to help us simplify, help us to get a good understanding without having to know the absolute reality of everything. So models are generally, and you'll hear me say this probably a couple times, generally wrong. All models are wrong, but some are useful. And I'm going to talk about a few models in fitness, in movement that I've learned from. I'll probably even miss some because half the time you don't even know. I didn't even know that I was learning about a different model. I was just learning different things. And as we go down this path, we will develop our own models of movement. The first major model that I feel like I had a deep dive in was what I would say was the knees over toes guy. But now I'm talking about this and I'm thinking about this, and there was also the Supple Leopard by Kelly Starrett, and that was a different movement model. That movement model was heavily biased in the CrossFit world, and the more I'm even talking about this, it just makes me think that there are models absolutely everywhere. But the power in understanding that all models are wrong and some are useful is you avoid the mistake that I made. So I went to Munich, did this internship at a great gym, MTMT, and straight up, I just learned like the knees over toes guy, principles of movement, and I thought I was the dog's bollocks. I thought I knew everything. I had this good understanding of hypertrophy, of CrossFit, of Olympic lifting, and one of the problems why I stopped working in person as a personal trainer was I couldn't help people get out of pain. That was like a big one. I want to help people get out of pain. And I didn't understand biomechanics enough. I didn't understand the body enough. How can I get this shoulder to stop hurting? How can I get this knee to stop hurting? And the knees over toes principles gave me answers to those questions I had thought. So like the whole knees over toes concept, which is actually from, all of these concepts are from a different strength coach, Charles Poliquin. But the knees over toes guy, Ben Patrick, pretty much popularized them, let's be honest. And his marketing was like, I will bulletproof your knees. And I'll do that by taking all of the joints around your knee through a full range of motion and working on developing those tissues. And he had principles that applied for the whole bottle, the whole body. And I was like, great, that makes sense. Strengthen the tissues, strengthen the muscles around the affected area, around the pain. That has to get people out of pain. That must be it. And he had a bunch of progressions and regressions for every single movement around the knee, around the shoulder, and had figured out, from my opinion, the golden nugget. All right, this is my path out of pain. I've finally solved that puzzle. Now I can help people get out of pain. I've got the answers. So this is how I was feeling walking into this internship in Munich. And obviously my dumb ass was wrong. but there's not like the knee over toe model is bad. It's a really good way to kind of, each model you're going to get something out of. And for me, it was like a better understanding of anatomy and a bit of an understanding of functional anatomy. What muscles do what extension is, what flexion is, what abduction, adduction is. I got little pieces along the way from this model, and I was deep in a YouTube rabbit hole learning from the Knees Over Toes guys podcast, and it really helped me progress in the journey. But there is levels to every single game, and the team in Munich knew way more about the body and functional anatomy, and you don't really understand a model until you can pull it apart completely, in my opinion. And that's pretty much what those guys did, because the Knees Over Toes guys just talked about developing the muscles, the tissues around the joints, almost in isolation, effectively in isolation. Train all the muscles individually, and that's going to help you get out of pain. But what it didn't include, just for an example of how the Knees Over Toes model is lacking, 0 plyometrics, 0 isometrics, 2 things that are almost foundational for most people to get out of pain with regards to tendons. And that wasn't talked about back then, at least in the Knees Over Toes guy model. That's just one way in which that model is limiting. And these guys in Munich were talking about breathing and gait, and I was like, what the fuck is going on here? What do you mean breathing? Are we talking about like breathing through your nose as we run? Because I'd heard about that for kind of energy system development, staying in that zone 2. What are we talking about here? They was talking about asymmetry. So in the Knees Over Toes model, a huge thing was symmetry. You wanted to be as strong on the right side as you are on the left. You wanted to pursue that symmetry. You wanted to achieve it with regards to the weights you were lifting on each side, the movement capabilities, etc., etc. And they just had a completely different view. It wasn't completely different, but it was different enough to provide a different lens that was more full, in my opinion. So there was a lot of talk about PRI, Postural Restoration Institute, which when you start to look into these more advanced models, they should blow your absolute socks off, because that's exactly what happened to me. They started talking about how, due to the nature of the universe, of our bodies, we are naturally asymmetrical. We are not symmetrical. And I was like, wait a minute, what is going on here? What do you mean we're not symmetrical? I've just learned for the last year or whatever that we are symmetrical, and we should pursue this symmetry. We should pursue the symmetry of like trying to get one side as strong as the other. But then if you actually look at the anatomy of a human, everything from the brain, the right side of your brain is further forward, it's larger. You've got a heart on one side, you've got liver on the other, your diaphragm attaches lower on your right side, there's an extra part of your lungs on the right side. Like, generally we're a little bit heavier, there's more stuff on our right side, which has consequences naturally, and then naturally we are asymmetrical. Now all of these things, I was like, whoa. What does that mean? And of course, like, naturally I can be disagreeable, and I'm not. I like to challenge, figure out what's really going on, and this opened this new complete world of learning, this complete world of different models, and for me to go down. So it was literally like, I would wake up, I would watch YouTube videos on PRI, breathing, gait, trying to figure this all out. Go there, watch them train people, like, figure out what they were trying to do, and they were great vibes, like, they were super cool. And then I would go home, watch more videos. I was literally waking up in the middle of the night watching videos, like 4 o'clock every morning, learning. This is amazing. Why is this so amazing? And a big So you've got PRI, Postural Restoration Institute, which has had huge influence on the industry, and I think it's only going to get bigger. But from there, you've got Bill Hartman. So Bill Hartman was one of the guys these people in Munich were talking about as like, okay, this guy is Big Daddy. His model is fantastic. It's much more developed than these other models. It takes into consideration the asymmetries of the body, deep understanding of breathing, deep understanding of gait, and it's almost like a unifying theory. So in physics, some crazy people pursue a unifying theory of everything, trying to bring everything together. So we can completely understand the universe. It's a bold move, to say the least. But this is kind of, in my opinion, almost that for training, in the training world. It's the expansion compression model. He doesn't even call it that. He calls it something else. But Bill Hartman. So this guy, let me preface this with breathing and gait. Why is that so important? So I like to think about it when I heard Angus Bradley and Pat Davidson talking about it on a podcast. And this was a lens that I like to look at things through the lens of evolution. So if you think about the first organisms on Earth, they were bacteria, they were fungi. They could move in one or two ways. And those two ways were like, they're going to expand or they're going to compress. That was it. They were kind of breathing, going through respiration. That was the initial movement. And of course, through like evolution, if you believe in Darwin's theory of evolution, which I think most people do now, unless you're in a religious cult, which is a different conversation. But we've evolved over time from this breathing standpoint, and you can always go back to this. So we started with breathing. We could expand and we could compress. When the bacteria breathed in, it expanded. When it breathed out, it compressed. And that was the start of our movement. And I think that's interesting. So like looking at our body and how we've evolved from this cellular level, from this bacterial level, is a beautiful way, in my opinion, to look at how we've developed, how we have evolved, and where do we go back to when things stop working. And from breathing, we of course develop more movement options, moving forwards and backwards as like little tadpole-esque things that can just move forward and backward in the sagittal plane. From there, we've evolved further to land, and you see these kind of alligators, these crocodiles, these old beasts, these old specimens that's still around today that can walk in this frontal plane. You see them going side to side. Same thing with gorillas, great in the frontal plane. And then you have us, and we stand out a little bit. We're the only one who are bipedal, who walk on two legs comfortably. And that's because we've got this access to the triplanar model. Like we've got the transverse plane, and we've got it to a high level just due to the nature of our structure. We've got this pelvis that can rotate, we've got this rib cage that can rotate, the whole body can rotate around each other. And that is, we've evolved that from breathing. So we can do this gait on two legs unlike any other animal, which is one of the reasons, arguably, why we are such an evolved species compared to everything else. Like we can walk for long distances due to a lot of factors, our energy systems, but mainly because we can stand on 2 feet, we can balance on 2 feet, we've got arms that we can use to fight, to throw, to defend ourselves, to climb. We can do all these things. And this is a little bit of why gait and breathing should influence our choices in how we train our body. Because these are the main things that we've evolved to do. I'm sorry to break some hearts, but we haven't evolved to bench press. We haven't evolved to back squat with a barbell. We might have evolved to squat, 100%. We might have evolved to run, walk, 100%. But we haven't evolved to be snatching a barbell. That is a modern construct that we made up for sport, for performance, to give a visualization of what the human body can do within some specific constraints. Just going to have a drink here 1 second. So this, I'm just going to call it Bill Hartman's model. Talks about there being two options for movement: internal rotation and external rotation. And why I love this model is it's a way to bring physiotherapists, strength and conditioning coaches, personal trainers, athletes all together. It is a unifying model. Before, you might have your physios over here doing physio stuff, strength coaches over here doing strength coach stuff. And because of the unifying nature of this model, you can bring them together, bring the professions together, bring sport together, so we can all advance and be on a similar page, be on a similar wavelength to push the industry forward. So Bill Hartman's model, effectively, internal rotation and external rotation are the only movement options available, compared to the traditional model where you have a variety: internal rotation, external rotation as a minimum, but you also have abduction, adduction, extension, flexion, and all these different movement models: dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. But the difference is you've got these movements and you associate them with each other. So when you learn functional anatomy, or you learn anatomy from a textbook, it will write down all these different movement options that I've just described independently of each other. And how is that useful for anyone? Because my argument is, no one wants to learn that. No one wants to just learn the singular names of movement options. Some nerds do, of course, forgive me. Some people do, and that's awesome. But having a bit of meaning and purpose behind these words, it gives you a reason to learn them in depth. Now, if you can understand that all these different movement options can work together to be associated with each other, and you can train those qualities together, and that's what you're looking for in the body. And if you're missing adduction, maybe you're missing internal rotation somewhere, and you get a clearer picture of the whole body as one thing, rather than looking at joints independently. So this is what gets me excited about this model, so I can start seeing a person move. Sorry for interrupting the pod. I'm just here to advertise the programs. Couple programs in the link in the bio, in the link tree. Hypertrophy program if you want to get jacked out of your nut, and the fundamentals program if you're a bit bored of your training, you want to mix it up, you're fed up of just lifting weights in the gym, and you want to come a little bit more athletic. Dive in to the link tree and get involved now. And they're missing external rotation at the shoulder. So that tells me we need to expand the backside of their rib cage to help regain that external rotation. So we might get them to lie on their back. We might get them to go through a variety of different exercises to help regain that external rotation. But you can start linking these things together. Okay, so this person can't adduct their hips. I get them standing in a straight line, and I get them to do a lunge, and they can't adduct their knees. Their knees don't go in. Their knees go out when they're trying to do a lunge, rather than going in and maintaining a nice straight line. That tells me they can't adduct. Probably means they're missing internal rotation at the hips, so we can do things to help regain that. Expand the backside of their glutes. We can lengthen their glutes, lengthen that posterior hip capsule, doing things like hinges. So it starts to tell a story, starts to paint a picture. So just to go back a little bit, the two movement options that are associated with each other, that are independent of each other, so you've got internal rotation. And internal rotation is associated with extension, adduction, so bringing things closer towards your midline, and plantar flexion and pronation of the foot and the hands. Everything that's bringing your body towards the center, towards the floor, downward force, internal rotation, producing force, and you've also got exhalation. So breathing is incorporated into this movement model. And on the other side, you've got external rotation, where you can start thinking about inhaling, your limbs, your ribs, everything moving away from the midline of your body. Abduction, abduction, the aliens are abducting my arm away in this external rotation. Dorsiflexion and flexion. Supination at the foot, the hands, all of these things. So you've got these two areas that you can start thinking about the body, which I just think is absolutely brilliant. And it gives meaning and purpose to actually learning about the functionality of the body, these different movement options. I didn't care what adduction was. Like, why do I need to learn that? Well, it's part of the whole picture of movement. It's part of breathing. It's part of gait. It's part of every bench press. It's part of every squat. It's part of every sport, every athlete. And now we have this model that brings it all together, which I just think is absolutely brilliant. And then you have different parts of gait associated with these different movement options. So when you're in the middle of a step, your foot is completely flat on the floor. You have these movements biased, these movement options biased in that mid state. So just picture you're maybe you're walking now, but you've got your foot flat, that middle of a step. You are pronating at the foot. You are adducting at the hips. You are extending through the hips, internally rotating through the hips. You are exhaling potentially. You're biased towards these. You're always doing everything, but you're going to have a bias towards one or the other. So that mid stance of gait, that's your internal rotation bias, versus when your foot's up in the air, either in front of you or behind you, that's your external rotation. And the same thing goes with throwing. You've always got this kind of mix of internal rotation, external rotation going on throughout the body. Very, very fascinating way to kind of think about the body, and it starts to bring movement together, and then you can see, all right, this athlete's missing this client's missing this, I'm missing this. How do I help regain it? Well, I can look through this lens and see what they need, see what movements are associated with that thing. If they're missing adduction, give them a bit more internal rotation. Give them a bit more internal rotation by helping them create space on the backside of their body, so they can then produce force, internally rotate. And again, what I said earlier, I hope this has been a nice little introduction to models and how you can think about it and navigate yourself through the fitness industry a little bit. And these are just a few, there's loads. A bit of a critique of the model is, well, you don't need to know it, technically speaking. You don't need to know any of this, and you can still get amazing results, because the traditional model of like separating all this abduction and all these different movement options, in internal rotation, external rotation, all these different movement options at the different joints, those alone, if you do sit down and learn them all independently, that can give you enough. And you can still get people to move better, get people out of pain, without learning about this expansion compression model from Bill Hartman. And now that's a pretty immature critique. I would say I still need to get further depth to be able to critique it further. Other limitations are, for me personally, like when you start thinking about this and you hear the word compression and you know lifting weights is associated with compression, you could be like, oh, that's a terrible thing. That's a bad thing. I don't want to be compressed. Who wants to be compressed? But sometimes you need it, which is another brilliant part of this model. I do really love this model. So like, for example, yoga teachers, yoga instructors who are so lengthened out, all they do is stretch. And often you've got a lot of yoga teachers, if they're in the game long enough, they'll start having a lot of pain. And you're thinking, they have so much range of motion. Why do they have so much pain? Well, they're too expanded. You need compression. A child, a baby, needs compression. It can't produce any force. So your ability to compress is your ability to produce force, where your ability to expand is to find space or have a bit more movement. And you need a general balance. So like we've evolved to have these kind of options available to us that you can read in a physiotherapy textbook at each joint. These human norms that you can kind of pursue. And if you're too extreme on either end, you can potentially have a bit of pain. Now, pain is a bit more complicated than that, but it's definitely something to consider. So it's a beautiful lens to help solve problems, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find trade-offs to make to help find different solutions. Another model I just want a little touch on, a little taste. We've only got a few minutes left before I turn off here, and that's the biopsychosocial model. And this is one of the reasons why the knees over toes guy could have been so successful, because there's so much confidence there. The biopsychosocial model, compared to these other models of pain science, of medicine, of health, we'll call them, like the biomedical model, which is you have an issue, here's a prescription, your problem is solved, which is just, in my opinion, a horrible view of the human body and our existence, and it doesn't consider the importance of social aspects, of psychological aspects, of other biomechanical or biological aspects. So we've got this biopsychosocial model, so biology, psychology, you could call it biomechanics, and social side, which are why the knees over toes guy, his confidence, his buy-in, his social proof with all of his followers, I was like, oh, this guy must be right. Everyone follows him. So like he had that social proof. So sometimes things will work for individuals just because of social proof. Like pain is complicated, performance is complicated, all these things are complicated. But pursuit of knowledge and continual pursuit of trying to get a better understanding of all these things opens up windows of opportunity to have more predictable outcomes. So if you're relying on the psychological or the social side, but your biomechanics understanding is terrible, it might be less predictable that you'll get the same outcome. If someone walks in and they don't believe in you or they've not seen the social proof, how are you going to help change their mind? Well, you're going to actually have to kind of get past their psyche by attacking the biomechanics side of the problem, trying to give them different trade-offs to get a different solution so they can buy in. Maybe they're like lost all hope and pursuing, sorry, my laptop's just turned off, great timing, pursuing one of the different aspects of this biopsychosocial model to help them get out of pain, improve performance, these kind of other things. So yeah, so this was a little quick pod going over a little intro into the models that I've been learning from, a bit of my history with models, and I hope you got some stuff to take away from this. Hope you enjoyed it. Drop me a question if you have any questions. Drop me a message if you have any questions. And I hope you have an amazing day. Goodbye.